that we're all kind of voluntary soldiers for, is it's more about the conflict and rather than just actually trying to kill one narrative. It's about controlling all the narratives, and then having people divided, I think, more than anything.
Hmm. Also, hi, new perspective. Good to chat with you in the voice chat.
What's up, DM brother? Yeah, we are. Uh, I'm not even sure if we've talked before, but we've been DMing a lot about how planes could never land on a spinning ball.
Yeah, we went over that a lot and other things too, and I feel like some of that stuff would probably be easier to talk through at a certain point in person. I don't know if you missed earlier. I forget who Jake was asking Geo, like, are you very serious about all this stuff? I just want to say, I get this question from friends of mine in real life when I say my interest, in finding this community, and they're like, are people serious? I'm like, yeah. Like I believe people are sincere. I don't know. I think people are sincere in the beliefs that they have here. That's my sense of getting to know all of you.
On that point, real quick, and I know that you want to say it's beliefs, and I was just correcting someone earlier. I don't know if you heard, but it's not. It's like more of a loss of a belief, which I know I've said to you before, because once you stop believing in it, it's a
Okay.
spinning ball. Then it's not like you're taking on a new belief necessarily. It's just by default you're back to your base axioms, which couldn't be a belief. But what I wanted to ask is, it's interesting that you get that reaction of, are they serious? But then when you think about it, like say it is flat and stationary, which is what we all experience. And then, like, say you were one of those that realized it is, you'd have a whole different perspective on people asking, "Are they serious?" And then how crazy it is that it would be like, wait, so they think that the Earth is like it seems? That's stupid. They can't be serious that it's like it seems. It's like the most obvious thing. Seems like the craziest thing if it is flat. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, when I said belief, I didn't mean it with any value judgment on the word belief. I just meant like sincerity
No, I
in the
know. I
convictions
know.
people hold. But I do think, like, well, if people don't mind me giving my sort of own kind of psychoanalytical take of what I'm hearing in all the time I've spent here, is that I think the flat Earth community has identified something real, which is that theories are there's ambiguity in drawing a theory from data, that there are multiple ways of interpreting data, and partially like realizing that what's sort of presented as a monolithic truth from the scientific mainstream can be questioned, may not really be monolithically true. There's a desire to sort of reset all the way back to the beginning of, if you can't trust anything coming from the scientific establishment, and you go all the way back to like, okay, what are my ground level senses of the world? The ground feels stationary, the ground feels steady, the ground looks flat from my eye level. So I'm going to start rebuilding an entire conception of cosmology, um, sort of from scratch. And people did believe that the Earth, that used to be a much more dominant position people had. So I totally, I don't think it's a crazy thing to believe, is what I'm trying to say. Like I think it is um, innately, like, you're right, it is how we experience the world. It is natural to default to seeing the ground as stationary and flat for the most part.
Yeah, and they probably didn't even think of it as a belief before they gave us the ball belief. Is my point. Like, it wasn't even like a question: Are we on a ball or is it flat? So why would they have to say they believe it's flat? Because there's no other. The ball conception wasn't even an option at that point. So it's not really a belief. It's just your base axioms. And you have to say, that you would think, if you're trying to figure out what reality is, that if you're going down the checklist, one of the major things is like, what are we directly experiencing in every possible way? Oh, stationary level. Okay. Well, we're going to start with that at least, and then we're going to build from there. And then if it's the opposite of that, there has to be like way more than just a pile of evidence that indicates it's such. It would have to be like at least one thing that's self-evident, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it took work for the scientific community to build up to the model of the world that they have, for sure.
Yeah, either work to make the deception that good or work to actually build what reality is, even though it contradicts everything we experience. Yeah. One or the other, right?
Yeah, yeah, one or the other. But definitely a lot
But
of work that goes
ZZ's a
into
flat earther. He just doesn't know it. I'm convinced because I heard you talking earlier with some people about some things that
it.
you
No,
don't buy into, which are
there's lots of
really,
things I don't buy
some of
into.
the frameworks of the modern science narrative. Like you don't think that special relativity really adds up either. Like you don't think time actually changes. You think the perception of time changes, which no one's really arguing with.
You're
It's
wrong.
not. If you think time can't, I mean, do you think that the astronaut's actually getting older or not? Or do you, I mean, time's just a concept, which you logically told me, which means that you don't believe that time itself is something that's malleable in the way that most people, and there's a lot of straw manning going on, like maybe the flat earthers think that all the ballers have to accept this, these notions that are kind of like far fetched, but part of the paradigm. But then if you really look at it, you see how ingrained it is to accept that the globe is a globe now. You're supposed to, at least, you're supposed to be a special relativity guy that thinks that, the device actually changes its length and it's not just a conceptual idea that helps explain it. It's actual, claim, like a physical claim that the device contracts and that time actually changes for it to work. And it's,
Well, I don't
and even
think you
though
need.
you could look at it as conceptual explanation, that I think is the claim is that it's actually a real thing.
I don't think that you need to know special relativity to think that the Earth is a sphere. I mean, people have been saying the Earth is a sphere for hundreds and hundreds of years, long before special relativity.
Well,
I do think that
the
this.
cornerstone is the special relativity saved it because of the ether, because they were testing for the like the Michelson-Morley seems like a benchmark that a lot of people focus on in this conversation, whether it's important or not necessarily. But it seems like a benchmark because they were trying to prove whether there was an ether or not, and then the claim was that there was no ether. And then on the other side, like look at the evidence of the actual test. It shows there was an ether. The friendship shows the exact amount that would be the ether, but then they had to make it a null result and kind of like skew all the interpretations of it and make people like abide by the special relativity interpretation to save the globe. Literally, to save the globe is how it gets interpreted.
Well, I thought the argument was to save heliocentrism. Like you could have a spherical Earth that's stationary at the center of the universe. I didn't
Yeah,
think
I
that there
guess you're
was,
right. To save heliocentrism, you're right.
to be more precise. Um, yeah.
Or to try to confirm it, at least to some extent, or to measure the actual orbit. Because I mean, you think about it back then, especially if people were saying, "Hey, we're on a ball and we're orbiting the sun," and they were like, "Okay, well, let's try to measure it." Was what they were trying to do. In a
Yeah, and then
just
since we don't have curvature and we got rid of heliocentrism and now we don't have curvature and it seems like maybe the dual pole fits it anyway, so why worry about a ball at all?
Oh, yes, I wanted to ask, so the dual pole map, is there a boundary to it? I mean, if you don't have the Antarctic ice wall, what's going on?
Well, actually, something you said earlier, which is something that I actually was going to pop in, I didn't have time to agree upon. What you were saying that it's harder to imagine a finite universe than an infinite universe, which I agree with, except that it would be like a finite plane. I can't imagine what the end of reality would even look like or
Oh,
be.
you pro
And if there
infinite
was,
plane?
yeah, an infinite. Well, I mean, I'd say like you were saying, infinite until proven otherwise, because we don't have any proof of a border, and I can't imagine what a border between reality and non-reality would look like.
Hmm.
You can't
Yeah.
even, like if there was a boundary and you put your arm through it, would your arm go into a non-reality? I mean, there's no way to even conceive of it. So why would I assume that's true? Not to say that I assume that it's infinite or that even could exist, but I mean, it's one of those unknowable paradoxes that without a boundary, to say it's finite is more of a claim than to say it's infinite, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely have that feeling that it it's easier for me to imagine taking rules of physics that I understand work like here in the room that I'm sitting in locally and just sort of imagine infinitely repeating and copy pasting that out without limit. That to me seems simpler than imposing a boundary, which is now going to raise all these new specific questions about what is the boundary, what is it made of, what does it mean for there to be a boundary, It tempts me to ask what's on the other side of it, but you're not supposed to ask what's on the other side of it if it's the end to reality. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's just sort of my gut feeling on why the idea of a finite reality actually feels more confusing to me. Like an infinite reality is odd, but at least I'd feel like I know what all of reality is if it's just the same rules repeating out again and again, same laws of physics in every cubic kilometer of space repeated forever, just like infinite map generation, as opposed to some sort of end that it comes to, which seems very arbitrary to me. But again,
Well,
that's
an infinite plane, I would say that an infinite plane doesn't have the problem that I think they were bringing up to you at some point. I had to go, but yeah, the idea that the universe is expanding, and then what is it expanding into? And if it's infinite, then why would there be anything that is, that we could even test or think is expanding? It goes on forever already, so it couldn't be anything that it's expanding into. So you get into some of those paradoxical arguments with an expanding universe, whereas an infinite plane doesn't have to have that expanding part.
well, I refer to it more as stretching. And I don't know if you were here earlier, but I gave the example of imagining stretching the number line to try to describe how I'm visualizing something that goes on forever, also elongating. Like infinity times two is still infinity. Um, so, and then we got sidetracked into a whole debate about, well, it just because something works in math doesn't mean it works in reality, which is true. But I provided the idea of imagining all the infinite numbers going on and on forever on a number line, and then you have them all move over one spot. So everything's moved over a bit. So the new number line is stretched compared to what you had before. But nothing's ever gone beyond infinity. It's still infinite. One of the weird things of thinking about infinity. I mean, infinity's weird, to be sure. Um, but we have the number line, so we have math tools to think about infinity.
Yeah,
So
I think that I like that you're into the electromagnetic interpretation of it, like you did with relativity being possibly an electromagnetic effect on the clocks and such. And I think you have to say that it's compelling to see that the dual pole with the stars does match the electromagnetic field pretty closely. I mean, that's got to be at least compelling, right?
You mean that the movement of the stars over the dual pole looks like a magnetic field?
Yeah, the electromagnetic field looks exactly like the dual pole star field.
Eh, Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
at the moment, all I could say is that that just looks like a sort of aesthetic, similar pattern. Um, I'm not sure how to go further from that.
but it's
But
a
Well, you can see it's similar. That if it's that similar, and the idea is that we're stationary and we feel that stationary, then I guess maybe you'd have to like actually get over the hump where you're considering that it could be like it seems, and then you might find it a lot more compelling. But you see that the electromagnetic field, like, it's not just like similar; it's exactly what it looks like.
so I mean, so then what are the stars made of if they're being moved by these electromagnetic fields?
Well, you have that's there's some theories actually. E1 has some theories about that with them actually being like made up of like a uh, mercury type substance that means that they dissipate with the sunlight, and the sunlight actually causes them to, like a fluorescent light that lights up the sky, and then everything in the sky where the sun comes through, and basically what he thinks is this theory, of course, an idea. Um, that that the stars have like the little nodes that they coagulate in, and those nodes are the structure, this lattice structure that is the electromagnetic field. And so when the sun's in the sky, it's not that the stars can't be seen, but maybe the stars aren't there in the same way because of the mercury effect of being excited by the sun's energy, and then they go back to where they were with the fluorescent field, fluorescent light idea, which is interesting. But yeah, I think the problem is claiming that we know what the stars are made of, and that we know the distances and all these things. And you can do a lot of kinematics to make that seem the case. But and if you're saying you know it and then saying science can't know anything, then we get into all these contradictions and fair criticism from flat earthers.
Yeah, as I said earlier, and I think it's important to repeat, it's definitely possible to construct a lot of different possible explanations of something. And I do think that the Globers trip themselves up when they declare that the current model of physics is absolutely secure. I don't think it ever possibly could be absolutely secure, because I think it is always possible that a new explanation of the same data, even a very radically different one, could rise. But when I listen to people get into these things, like, I'm interested in it, and I'm interested in the energy and the effort that many of you are putting into constructing these alternative cosmologies, but this is not simple anymore. I mean, you started with a claim of like, okay, our base level senses make it feel like the Earth is stationary and flat. All right, I'll grant that is what it feels like to our nervous system. But then at this point, as we're talking about all this speculation about what the stars are and how they move around the flat, like, if your criticism of modern science is that it feels like it got way too tangled up in complexity and unfalsifiable concepts, then I do feel like you're walking down the same path here in also spinning a really elaborate web of explanations. So
Yeah, and
it's fun.
that's what most people realize, and then they're like, okay, so if you were to like look at it as objectively as possible, and you're like, okay, wait, there's a kinematic equivalence between like just the stationary geocentric Earth and the heliocentric model. Okay, so that means that is not necessarily one or the other. And then you look at, oh, okay, there's a lot of elaborate propaganda as well as elaborate kinematic reverse engineering seeming to go on. And, it's like pushed and pushed and pushed, and we're told it's this for sure. And it seems like a campaign to convince people more so than a very honest and, intellectual process that you would think would be there. And then if you add up like both sides of it and you're like, wait, and then on top of that, my direct experience is stationary level, then that might outweigh, all the other things because we have propaganda on one side and then we have, just your basic, your base axioms on the other. And it's hard to say that, just because you have a pile of evidence, you have quantity, and then you have your direct experience, which seems like quality over quantity when you really get right down to it.
um I mean, you have direct experience of what it feels like to stand on the ground. You don't have direct experience of what it's like to ride along with one of the stars in the sky. You haven't gone and scooped up to see some material from them or tried to sample them to see what they're made of. I mean, I feel like you're affirming a lot of things that I've come to see here. What seems like the biggest, some of the big motivations that people have. I mean, one of which is clearly a lot of distrust of the scientific mainstream, and I don't even disagree with that necessarily. But I don't think it should be controversial to say that there's a very strong motivation amongst the flat earthers in finding an alternative because it is an alternative, because you also don't institutionally and politically trust mainstream science, which is fine. And then the other thing that a lot of weight goes on to is the just direct firsthand human experience of standing on the ground. And those are fine motivations. But I do feel like the flat earth models are very challenged when they try to start explaining all the details of what we see in the sky and very quickly fall into the same levels of sort of elaborate, sort of convoluted complexity and tons of assumptions and models built on models that a lot of flat earthers criticize mainstream physics of sinning on. So, I mean, it's
But
pieces of my
you're
have
kind of
great
new to the
don't have.
conversation a little bit. You're still a little bit new to the conversation, right? Relative to most people in here, I would say that if you're honest about it, when you look through, like, after years of looking into it, you'll see like one red flag after another, and the way that the reactions are. I mean, like, do you buy the Tesla car in space? I never got an answer from you on that. Is that like totally legit in your mind?
I mean, I do suspect and think that rockets putting things in space are happening. I, yeah, I mean,
I'm talking about in particular what we were shown with the Tesla car, and then Musk saying it looks so fake it must be real.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about Musk, I particularly have a great deal of distrust for him as an individual. So that might be another topic. But
Yeah, it's not really just a matter of distrust. It's just like it piles up so much after so many years. You're like, of course that's what they did. Of course that's what they said. And it's not just because you're incredulous. It's like beyond obvious. It's like the kid standing there with chocolate all over his face, crumbs all over the floor, and the cookie jar is broken on the floor, and he's claiming he didn't get into the cookie jar. That's how obvious once it all adds up for most of us. And you'll find that flat earthers are the people that usually know the globe model better than most of the globers in the conversation because they were like distressed about it possibly not being a globe, and they had to know all the particulars before they could decide whether it was possible or not that it's actually stationary and level like it seems. So it's not just a distrust of science. It's more like this is impossible for lots of reasons. Actually impossible, not just not theoretically sound, like literally impossible, especially if we see too far, especially if planes can't land. Some of these things break the model. So then going to your default base axioms of stationary and level doesn't even seem like a choice. It's like, okay, well, that's what it obviously is. As far as the model goes, that's a totally different thing. I mean, we have to, start from scratch on that. And just because there's not a perfect flat Earth model, beyond the dual pole and some of these things that seem to work better than what we have, it doesn't take away from what I just said about the globe model not even working.
well, I mean, we've been talking about this, and I'm sure we'll continue to. That I've got some specific disagreements about some of these claims of the globe model not working. But one thing I said, I think it would be important to say for everyone, listening here is I am defaulting to assuming that the space travel stuff, the probes, the astronauts is real. But let's say it's not. Like, let's say you guys definitively prove to me the moon landing was fake. We've never sent a satellite into orbit. The probes on the rovers on Mars don't exist. So, like, you prove to me that this is all fake. There really is this massive government conspiracy to forge all this information. There's never been someone in a spacesuit floating above the Earth. That wouldn't change what I assume the layout of the cosmos is, though. I'd definitely be very bothered to find out that all of that other stuff is fake. But I'm not thinking about this in a way that it would then lead me to think that the model of the Earth as a sphere going around the sun and the sun going around the galaxy isn't real just because, let's say, the moon landing
Yeah,
was
but
faked.
wouldn't that
Why, why would
imply
you
though
think they'd
that
be faking it then?
you've got a
There are a
whole
lot of
social
people.
orchestration that everyone's getting? Yeah, go ahead.
I knew that might be a stimulating comment to throw out there.
Go ahead, Ricksky.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say briefly that like probably a great majority of the people that don't think we went to the moon probably also believe in the globe Earth.
Yeah,
In terms of
probably.
just the mass numbers. I mean, obviously there's flat Earth and everything, and people as well, and etc. But go ahead, Ricksky. I was just gonna say that quick point. So I'm just saying you could think the space stuff is not genuine, and technically there are people who also still believe the globe. So you're just saying that wouldn't change your view on the shape, but it probably would make you question the people behind giving you some of that information about the shape, wouldn't it?
But I didn't get my information about the shape of the Earth or the cosmos or anything like that from NASA. I mean, obviously they do a lot of outreach and they say a lot of stuff and they present themselves as authority figures. But like when you peel that away, what NASA really is like a wing of government and military technological development. Like the goal of NASA is not to answer the question of where the universe came from. The goal of NASA is to help the US stay ahead of other countries on rocketry technology and surveillance and robots and stuff like that. So they do outreach and they do fund and promote things that are meant to educate the public and get kids excited about science and stuff like that. But I don't see them as actually being driven by the goal of what a theoretical physicist does, of actually trying to answer the why question of why are we here? Why does the universe exist? I think that they have much more kind of immediate technological goals of what they're really.
Well, if they get, what is it, 62 million a day? Or 60, is it 62 million now a day?
Of
I
what their
think,
budget
I'm not sure, someone could correct me. 62 million a day goes to NASA.
much.
So,
Okay, but I haven't looked it up.
right. So then if they're helping us stay technologically ahead, there could be things that are true about that. In fact, like if it is, even if it's a flat earth, that they're doing some kind of like secret flat earth, outer ponder exploration stuff with that money. But I mean, can we really name like that many things that they're giving us besides Velcro and some of these other things that people, name for the 62 million a day? Like, think about it, a day. What's that add up to for over a year? It's just
Look at your pen.
basically like, yeah, think about that. Go ahead.
No, sorry, man.
I thought you were going to add to that. I thought you said you wanted to jump in.
No, just the upside down pen. I was wanting to jump in before, but that's cool. It's kind of moved on a little bit, but we can swing back around.
Well, what were you going to say? Because
Okay.
I was the one that half interjected. Do you remember what your point was?
No, we all try to go at the same time. I mean, what was it? He mentioned all the probes and all the other stuff that they're sending up and shooting up, which all kind of violate, I think, and I'm not really technical on the specific terminologies, but they violate the conservation of motion or energy, I think. You put an accelerometer on them and you will not detect the acceleration or the increase in velocity, but apparently that's what they're telling us. So they're literally just violating that whole law there, like
What do you
basically
mean?
violating Newton.
What circumstance? When the rocket's
Well, that's
going up, or
not when the
falling?
rocket's going up. When you're talking about slingshotting around Earth, and what is it? Essentially, you think that the Tesla car, the vehicle, is in orbit around the Earth. You can't detect any of that orbital mechanics or like any pressure on that thing. It just all kind of violates the like what we understand really is sort of, how would you call it? The mathematical principles that sort of describe essentially the motion or movement of any mass. It's all in violation of that.
Yeah, and
And what was it?
three body problems admitted to be unsolvable, except for like the exception of the mathematical solution with Lagrange points or something added in it. That doesn't really satisfy the three body problem, really, in most people's.
Double pendulum too.
And then what was it? Like
Simple
you
things
said
like
that blew my mind when you said that if you found out that they were lying about space. I mean, the orchestration, and you said you'd be fine with that. That wouldn't change. It wouldn't sort of raise an eyebrow. I am not necessarily using your exact terminology, but it wouldn't raise your eyebrow about the interpretation of cosmology if you found out that these guys are orchestrating this. Like, yeah, like,
and
dude,
yeah, no, it wouldn't affect that. I mean, but Gio pointed that out. There's way more people who doubt the moon landing than who think that the Earth is flat. Yeah, and like even though like NASA and these other government agencies do talk about space, I don't disagree that there's sort of a propaganda effort involved in it. Like I think that they want to keep getting the next wave of kids to go into the sciences, and they try to excite them with these big ideas about the universe. But at the end of the day, the goal is to get people like working on tech and military stuff. Like excite
that's part of
kids
the
with,
military industrial
well,
complex.
it branched off from the Air Force,
I don't know, but it's like, I mean, if you just look at the military industrial complex today and the way it orchestrates wars in the world, I mean, ipso facto, it has a profiteering motive, not one in, like, genuinely instantiated in sort of the human endeavor to conquer the world or something, and whatever that is. It kind of blows my mind. Even the guys that sort of think that, like, why would they go to all? They've got a good excuse, right? That they would fake space just to prove that they could beat the Soviets, essentially. But it's just such a violation of a society and trust. That sort of, I don't know how you guys get away with that.
well, it would be a big violation of trust on a lot of things, but
It also
reasons I have
implies that.
for thinking
Sorry.
the cosmos is laid out the way I think it's laid out doesn't have anything to do with whether or not the moon landing happened or whether or not there's a Tesla car in orbit. or
At the
any
end
of
of the
the
day,
They tricked billions of people into believing this stuff. Like
no.
that implies that the human condition is such that you can, your science doesn't matter to the human condition in reality. Like we still haven't. If science is meant to prevent, you know, bad thinking of human beings, and then we find out that a bunch of our scientific institutions are orientated around trying to disorientate the human. Your society's upside down at that point.
Except that
might
I
be
can
upside
take a
down.
telescope and use it for myself and look at Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, Mars, etc. And I can clearly see these things in the sky with my telescope, and I can see other stars, I can see the sun, I can see the moon. So again, they couldn't fake
The
that.
only
They couldn't
the only
Yeah,
exclusive
flat earthers
evidence
aren't
of Earth
claiming those
being
things don't
enclosed
exist.
or
That,
invent the
that's the claim.
telescope to fake that for me. I can do this independently, and whatever they say or do, be it a lie or not, won't change the facts about Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and all those things I observed.
Yeah, the claim, the flat earthers aren't claiming those things don't exist. You realize that, right?
Except the claim of what they are also, when I look at them through a telescope, I can clearly see what they are. I can also use the spectrometer to see what they're made of. But
Your
Well,
eyes
yeah, but
trick you every
that's
day.
where it gets questionable, right? That's where the questionable is, right? They're there, yeah, but then the interpretation, it's always about the interpretation, right? So you
Yeah,
can't
sure.
say you know for sure what they're made of.
Yeah, and I
but
was gonna say this.
yes, you can.
Can I just?
Well,
Hold on, ZZ. If you
I-
wanna, you go
yeah,
first.
because I avoid these definitive things. Like, okay, to this point, if I can just look at stuff with my own amateur telescope here, right? So it might be. I think society is upside down. I think the institutions of power do predominantly exist to manipulate and deceive people. Like, I don't deny that. So let's say I found out that like the entire moon landing was orchestrated, totally staged in a studio or something like that. I could still look at the moon with my own amateur telescope and think to myself, that looks like a rock. I mean, it could be something else. I get that, but I also do think it looks like a rock. Like that's
It's
my
the one
first
flying rock.
impression.
It's the
It's not
one
just that
flying
one,
rock
it's
that you will
Jupiter
ever
and
see in the
Mars.
world, ever again. It's a
No, no,
very
no.
unique
No,
rock.
it's
You know, it
Jupiter
doesn't.
and Mars.
What
And
about
all
the
Jupiter is a
asteroids
gas.
that
It
we
doesn't
also
look like
can
a
find?
rock.
Okay,
I
no,
can
you're
find
right.
local
Jupiter looks
asteroids with
well.
my telescope.
Yeah,
Literally
yeah.
asteroids
Hey,
that are close to Earth.
Find
What about
asteroid.
the
What are you
moons of
talking about?
Jupiter?
yeah, I gotta go soon, but I just wanted to drop one more thing. By the way,
Sure.
E1, the guy with the dual pole model, my friend that I sent you the videos on, he thinks that the moon's made of something. He thinks it's made of a certain material that's like a phosphorus aluminum material, and that the sun's made of like tungsten and iron, and so he thinks they're solid objects. They're riding the electromagnetic field, and that's how we deploy the satellites. The real satellites they put up there have to be put up at a certain angle at the equator, and they actually are riding the electromagnetic field one side or the other, which has a different charge, which they have to know about. So there's a lot of details. I think that a lot of flat earthers maybe still assume they're all on balloons when there might be real satellites, and then they're utilizing the electromagnetic field, which is what the stars and the sun and the moon all ride on. And they could be physical objects, and a lot of these things don't need to be completely fake or not real or not solid for it to still be a stationary Earth like we experience.
Yeah, I mean, all of these alternative explanations are interesting, and I don't think I could falsify them, so maybe, but definitely my first hand gut. We talk about like, oh, you're putting a lot of weight on, the ground feels stationary to me. Do you want to put weight on firsthand experience? Could the sun and the moon be all these different things? I guess they could, but my firsthand experience of what I think they are as I'm looking at them is like that. It seems way more simple to think that they're
Is it
masses
It,
moving
it could be a
through the
mass, but
void.
can you hold that same standard to the motion? Because we see the sun move, we don't see us move.
Yeah, you don't feel
Uh,
like you're falling backwards from the sun when there's a sunset. You don't interpret it that way. Nobody does. Maybe it's because it's not that way, or maybe we're all falling backwards, and that's why it's a sunset, even though it's really hard to think of it that way.
um, yeah, no, I said, yeah, it feels like the ground feels steady. That's definitely how we perceive it. But I was going to say that making sense of the motion of these objects like Mars and the moon and everything in the sky, the simpler explanation to me is my understanding of gravitational orbital mechanics as opposed to all of the other ideas that are being voiced here.
No, just
Electromagnetism
classical.
is your thing, though. Electromagnetism is your thing, ZZ. Why wouldn't it be an electromagnetic field? Like, I mean, that's what you're into more than anything. I thought that it'd be compelling for you in that reason, for that reason alone, maybe, because the orbital mechanics is all just kinematics, and that's
Well,
easily
what I
reverse engineerable, and that means the sun that's supposed to be a billion times larger than the Earth. And then we have like the size of it doesn't look anything like that. So everything you see with the globe model is an illusion, right? The sun size, the moon size, the fact that we see it setting or moving, and it's actually us falling backwards. So it's just a reverse engineered, possibly reverse engineered thing. And then if it could possibly be reverse engineered, and then the stationary Earth is more sound and resonating with our experience, that's where it's like, wait a minute, okay. And it takes a while. None of us really wanted to think it was possible at first.
So I didn't say that I thought that orbital motion was literally caused by the electromagnetic force. I've been clear in saying that I think that gravity is real and is a distinct, separate phenomenon from the electromagnetic force. But what I have said is that I think our understanding of the electromagnetic force is much more complete than our understanding of gravity. And that I think that a positive direction to go in for making progress on better understanding gravity is to rework the gravitational theory and take more lessons from the success of electromagnetic theory in trying to model gravity. So
Yeah,
I
and
didn't
that's
say
the
that.
thing. I didn't think you were saying that. I wasn't saying that. I thought you might think it was more compelling that maybe the motions could be like they're running a circuit, which would actually be the same, fluid motion you would expect from the idea that it's perpetually falling, which, is debatable if that's even sound science, that it could be doing that, perpetually falling toward the Earth, but then orbiting, and it has to be perfect. I mean, everything has to be this unfalsifiable claim, which I know you take issue with no matter what. You can't just make an unfalsifiable claim and then call it truth. There has to be a way to falsify it. And it seems like, every
But
time that, and as far as progress go, I just wanted to say the problem, if you, whether you think it's flat or not, if you see problems within the community or in science in general, where you feel like you're part of something that's making progress, but then you see the pseudoscience that is inhibiting the progress because of the people that are too old or whatever, I heard you say something, science only progresses when people die. And if that is the truth,
Yeah,
I mean, there's
that's
some things that, are pseudoscientific, and especially if the globe model is a reverse engineered thing, then it's hard to feel like, you're making progress in a lot of these areas that are tied to that. But I'm one of those people that say, it'd be detrimental to society for everyone to, just find out what it seems like it's, actually going on here, because the economy is based on it. If there's more land that threatens the resources, like if there's abundant resources, then the scarcity of resources, which the economy is based on. I mean, there's all kinds of things. If we have outer ponders, I mean, it could be like a thing that's not, we're not ready for yet, and maybe they rolled it out to try to tell us the truth and maybe cause some kind of reset by telling us the truth about it. Who knows? But I mean, if you got two kinematic models that are equivalent already, then don't you think maybe the one that you directly experienced might have some weight?
well, I guess I don't really know in a ton of detail beyond what you've described what this magnetic circuit model really is. Um, you've gestured at things and comparisons between things. It's not like you've produced a simulation that I could like follow and be like, ah, yeah, that's how that works in detail. But maybe you'll produce that.
Yeah,
We'll look at it.
simulations. I mean, there's one that Alan did with you can transfer it into a dual pole, even though it doesn't have the prime meridian corrections and some of these other details. I think E1 was right about possibly, and so yeah, the simulations. But even a simulation, does that make it more true? Like just because the globe model has like all the money backing it and all the propaganda and all the piles of evidence that are unfalsifiable claims mostly, it doesn't make it any more true.
Well,
That's what
I just mean.
Can I just quick question, Z? Like,
Yeah.
what is it about the moon? Like the falsification of the moon? Like, you claim that it's a rock. Is that falsifiable? That statement?
Is it falsifiable if the moon is a rock? Yeah, I'd
Yeah.
imagine if someone went there and scooped up material and it wasn't rock, or they couldn't land on it, that would falsify my visual perception that I think it looks like a rock.
It's not within our like tangible resources, though, as like human beings to go and falsify that or test it in the terms that you're referring to. So we're still sort of suffering from the same
Well,
problem. So I wanted
I mean,
to interject with.
I think it is because I don't actually doubt the moon landing. But is it outside of your and my like personal resources? Yeah, like you and me personally are not going up there to test what the moon is. So the point I was making is that even if I was convinced by new evidence that the moon landing was fake, that wouldn't change what I think the moon is just from my eyeball observation through the telescope of it, of just like, what does this look like to me?
Maybe not right away, but if like one thing after the other keeps like pointing towards why are they like pushing this globe thing on us so heavily with all these unfalsifiable claims, and then we see that the kinematics are just like possibly mathematic. It's a process. I think the moon landing is one of the first steps for most people, and it seems like they're basically admitting that with some of the movies and showing it in cartoons and all that other stuff. That we didn't really do that, and then they can just like write it off to the space race, and we were trying to beat the Russians. But if the Earth is flat, then it makes a lot more sense that it's just an agreement amongst the elite, and it's the masses that are paying the price for everything, which we already know to be true in a lot of other ways.
Can I also just say, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a parallel here, but by technicality, I mean, what is interdimensional travel falsifiable as well? Like, I mean, we've got videos of people doing that as well. I mean, it's just I'm having trouble with this notion that you think it's falsifiable to go land on the moon when someone else is doing it, not you.
I mean, I think if I had the money, I could build a rocket, and if I got to the moon and stepped foot on it and scooped up some gravel, I would confirm my visual guess, my visual hypothesis that the moon is rocky. And if I couldn't get there or discovered it was something else, I mean, this does feel like it's in principle testable with the right resources. I mean, something happens if I fly up in a rocket, like whatever you think is going to happen. Like I crash into a barrier. Okay, then, I've falsified the idea that the moon was something I could reach.
Why wouldn't they just
I mean,
make
do you
high
buy like the
altitude
whole thing? We
planes?
lost the telemetry data. I mean, like, come on. I mean, they had the technology to do it before, but they don't now. I mean, the R2 stuff. I mean, did you really look at that? It was just like basically a joke.
Why do you need a rocket anyway? Why don't you just use a high altitude plane that just keeps getting higher?
Well, I don't think that the atmosphere extends all the way up to the moon.
But I mean, you've seen it. It cuts to CGI. We never get like. I mean, there's a good point to be made. Like, think about if you decided that you're not sure anymore. You're like, oh wait, if they have all these satellites and they've been going up to space all the time, wouldn't we have like more like the abundance of like Earth spinning and planes flying upside down from every angle and everything you possibly want would just be piles and piles and piles if they could actually take pictures of Mars or some of these other galaxies with the detail that they're showing us, they're claiming to have. I mean, we'd have everything and more if it was actually happening. It seems.
Well, wait a minute, but there is like constant 24/7 time lapse videos from like the
There's
International
no
Space Station.
satellites. Yeah, but no pictures of satellites or planes flying upside down. Thank you very much.
What do you mean there's no pictures? Of course there's pictures.
Show me one video of like planes flying upside down on the globe, and also the 22,000 satellites.
Do you mean upside down?
What's the time lapse you're talking about? I'm sorry, I missed that. What was the time lapse that we have pictures of?
Well, I could just take a normal video of a plane and turn it upside down.
Yeah, you could. I mean, that in fact, they might get bold enough to just give us all of those things I just said, and it could just be AI or whatever, and we would never know. The technology's to the point now where they could just show us like the tech they used for the movie Gravity and use that, and then say that's real, and people wouldn't care or wouldn't know. So, it's not really a point that makes you decide one way or another. But at this point, there's enough footage and enough stuff that we've seen that is very questionable, if not laughable, that seems like it helps to make more flat earthers, which I think is their plan. I think they rolled it out on purpose and plan on using it for the New World Order. So we're falling for it.
It's a new perspective. You said something I think is rather key, where you seem to say that one of the reasons for thinking that the Earth is flat, that the globe model is false, is because you're like, why are they pushing it so hard? I hear that, but I don't think that way. Like, I don't. I I don't feel motivated to doubt the truth of something just because government agencies are saying it.
No, that's definitely not what flat earthers do. It's not just because they're pushing it. That's just one of the things that adds on to all the things that make the globe literally scientifically possible.
It's like
I don't think that I don't believe something because the government says it, but I also don't disbelieve something, or it doesn't add weight to my disbelief of something because the government says it either. Anyway, sorry, someone else said something they wanted to get in.
I was
Well,
just
so I'll
thinking. I
just say
mean, you're gonna be very
they
careful
said
with like believe.
this.
Go ahead.
I
I
was
think
just
you're
saying
breaking
it's
up, Lockie.
unfalsifiable from known liars. So I'm breaking up.
I think so, but I do want to let you go ahead, man. You did clear out right towards the end.
Yeah, I was just saying it's an unfalsifiable claim from known liars. So that you have to take it with a grain of salt.
What, that the moon is rocky?
Well,
Yeah, it
any
doesn't
of the
look like that at all.
unfalsifiable claims.
The telescope does not look like the moon that they show us with the moon landing stuff. If you zoom in on that, I wouldn't guess at all it's the same surface, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, dude, yeah, if it was a rock, a spherical rock, I mean, it is such a unique thing. Just like, these things compound, right? Effectively, it disobeys the what do they call that? Like the shadow, the appropriate shadow of a material as it sort of curves around away from the light. So it just defies that. Apparently, we're in a pinball galaxy or some sort of snooker table, essentially, with balls flying all over the place. And this one happens to have found itself in the perfect distance from the Earth, from your visual point of view, such that it's the exact same size as the sun. Like that always
you
used
mean
to,
the
like, even
moon?
before flat Earth, like that used to, like, I scratched my head, and that was enough for me to think, like, hey, there's probably some sort of cosmological intervention at least going on. And then I came across this flat Earth discussion. I'm like, oh,
Like,
look, there you go, easy done. That's why the moon happens to be the same size as the sun. It's not some sort of cosmic pinballs game that you're in. They're just lying to us, and that's a much easier, much more rational, like statistical conclusion to come to once you sort
hey,
of
look,
Yeah, the
bear out the weight like that.
chances of a Goldilocks zone, the Goldilocks claims, it's like, I don't know, it's like they treat us like, when the people defend the Goldilocks claims, they sound like dumb blondes, ironically.
well,
I
we
can
wouldn't
defend the
be
Goldilocks claim though.
alive. I mean, that's a
Go ahead, though.
precondition to be here. But I will say, yeah, of course,
Yeah.
the fact that the moon completely eclipses the sun in the way it does is, yeah, it's truly a miraculous cosmological coincidence, and I don't even think it's the biggest one, and that we could have a lot of fun going through lots of images of things in space that I think are even more extraordinary stuff. And what do I make of all this? I don't know.
Images in space? Are you talking about the stuff that you see through a TV screen? I'm talking about something you can visually verify for yourself. Not, and I
No, I
don't think
mean
you can
something
do
that
that
can
with
be
the
visually
moon and that it
verified
being a
with enough,
rock.
with a long enough exposure telescope on some of these galaxies. There's weird stuff out there. There's a lot of weird stuff to find if you keep looking for it, and the moon eclipsing the sun in the way it does is definitely up there. I mean,
There's weird stuff in the galaxies, yeah, but none of it's actually moving in front of your eyes. It's dead still, points of light.
sure, but I just meant other weird alignments
Are
of
the
things into
are the
patterns that,
galaxies rotating? I thought the
yeah,
galaxies were
they're all
rotating.
talking. Yeah, no, I mean, but definitely the eclipse thing. Yeah, if you want to
You
point to
can't
something.
observe them rotating. They're not moving at all. They're just dead still. They're just like looking at in one of those shallow rock pools at the beach.
True.
There
Okay,
are,
yeah,
there,
because I
there
mean,
are some
they'd be
things
rotating
though,
so
like
slow.
scientifically. I think that like ZZ's like open-minded more so than most like ballers in general that are arguing for that side. Definitely more so than the anti-flat earthers, which don't do anything for your side at all because they just make you look bad, you know, because they're just straw manning and you know desperately framing everything as like one-sided. But the thing about space and what you see and everything is you know, dependent on there being this nothingness, like they depend on vast amounts of nothing existing, which I think that, you know, since you're able to see that there's some fallaciousness going on with time dilation not being what they're claiming with special relativity and such, you know, could there actually be a place where nothing literally exists? Because they need that for the propagation of light and all that to be, you know, somewhat plausible with these trillions of light years and all that.
Yeah, so I said about special relativity is I didn't say that I thought that there was a flaw in the theory. And when I say theory, I mean a way of making a set of predictions. But I do think that the interpretation, the language of how it's described is very unhelpful and creates conceptual confusion. And the idea, like the statement, time slows down, therefore you would age slower, to me is a non explanation. It's very cyclic, because I would go back
What?
to, well, what is time? And if you say time is the tick rate of a clock, the swing of a pendulum, something physical that's going through cycles that you can count, to say that it slows down because time slowed down, uh, that sentence does not make sense to me, like linguistically. So I do have a very different way that I explain the predictions of relativity and where they come from. That's not the standard way of
Yeah, it's
explaining
just
it.
it's just the contradictions that were I mean, it's okay to deal with one reference frame at a time, but if you have two reference frames that are literally impossible to simultaneously exist, and people have to say, oh well, just deal with them one at a time, and it's okay that they contradict each other. That's what people are calling retarded, not just the
Yeah.
idea of relativity.
Well, and the other thing I said is that I reject the postulate that all reference frames are equally valid. And what I've said is that I think that the reasonable assumption is to first assume that there's only one valid reference frame. That I don't think it's conceptually reasonable. I find it problematic in a lot of different regards to start with the declarative assumption that you're going to say all reference frames are equally valid. I would not start with that assumption. But what physically happens is a different story, is a different matter. So let me try to put it this way. If it is the case that all reference frames are valid, then I would say we need to be able to prove that as a result of mechanisms and forces that can be studied within a single reference frame. So I'm rejecting it as a assumption that people are taking as a way of starting a framework for understanding physics. That's not where I would start.
But the GPS and a lot of these things that you know we use practically, you know, uses a stationary reference frame. You know, and it's funny because the assumption is that there is no valid you know lab frame for us to reference things by, but that's what we do on a regular basis for anything to work.
Well, no, the
As
assumption is
well
that,
as
that they're all valid, or any inertial frame is valid. Not
yeah,
that there's
you
no
could call it an inertial frame that's moving, and you could have the
yeah.
philosophy about it moving, but it's not treated that way. It's treated as stationary.
Hmm?
That is correct.
Yeah,
I'm
so
saying for all practical uses, we assume a stationary Earth.
What happens is if you assume a reference frame other than Earth, you end up with the wrong prediction. The only reference frame that makes the right
Right.
prediction all the time is the stationary lab frame on Earth.
All right, well, that I disagree with. I'm very fine with taking the initial assumption of the safe assumption that our lab frame on Earth is the only one we should assume is valid. that we shouldn't assume that others are going to be valid. But it's very okay with me if then our experimental tests prove that the rules of physics do work out consistently in these other moving frames. So this claim that they don't in moving frames, I don't know where that's coming from.
Well, no,
Well,
no.
no. Are you saying
in
that
regards to rotation
you
specifically.
philosophically don't agree? Then is what you're saying. You philosophically at this point don't agree, but you don't have evidence that it's not true, right?
No, what I'm saying is I philosophically disagree with basing a scientific theory on the assumption that all reference frames are valid. I wouldn't do that. I would only assume that there's one valid reference frame. But experimentally, I know of a lot of evidence that says actually that moving reference frames are equally valid. But that's an experimental outcome for me. It's not something I would assume as a core principle.
In regards to rotation?
Not with
In
regard to
regards to
rotation.
rotation, though,
No,
or
just with regard to linear
okay.
motion.
So with rotation, there's
Yeah.
clearly a preferred frame.
Yes, between rotating and not rotating. Yes.
Yeah, like if it seems stationary and everything's used practically as stationary, that just adds more weight onto the kinematic model that says it could be stationary, rather than a kinematic model that says it's actually rotating without anything else but an unfalsifiable claim that it rotates, or that I don't think any flat earther is trying to say that motion isn't relative. That's an agreed upon thing. But to say that we're not using a stationary, that we're just using it as stationary, but it's really not, is where the pseudoscience starts to be like, wait a minute, what the fuck?
Well, rotation does have to be falsifiable because rotation isn't the same as non-rotating. And then that's where I would point to the pendulum and the gyroscope. And I know people will give alternative explanations. So I would just
Better
say, okay,
explanations, in fact, better explanations of the electromagnetic field for sure.
all right, well, maybe that works. But it is also the case that the rotating Earth model does predict this precession of the pendulums. And if the pendulums didn't precess, that would invalidate the rotating Earth. Like
In
it
correlation
needs-
with the rotating of the sky, which is proposed as an electrical phenomenon.
Sure.
Yeah, you
And I'm
see
not
how
saying-
it could be reverse engineered. It could just be like that we have this ether wind, and that comports with our experienced reality. Which if it's one way or the other, again, it's a toss of the coin. The electromagnetic field flattens out towards the celestial equator, which would give the same results. In fact, when you asked about when you thought the accelerometer would show more acceleration towards the equator, and then I looked into it and found out that possibly that the AI at least was saying that the readings would flatten out, or it would be zero at the equator, like they say for the pendulum. And if there was a space in between the two electromagnetic fields, then that could also be the reason that there's no precession at the equator or a reading on the accelerometer.
Oh, I mean, you were bringing up the thing of does the pendulum not precess if it's at the equator, and I wasn't actually sure of all the details on that. But
Yeah, the
And
Glob
those-
claim is that it wouldn't precess at the equator.
I need to look into that one. But the point being, someone asked, is the rotation falsifiable? And yes, it is falsifiable because the rotation has to require the precession of these gyroscopes and pendulums. So that would have been a way to disprove the rotating Earth, but the rotating Earth.
Yeah, but if you have those other interpretations, then it's not falsifiable because it's just a matter of interpretation.
Dude, yeah, they went over it recently. They went over all the data from all those pendulums data. Dude, it is not consistent. It is totally not consistent enough. It's totally all their pendulums are a total fallacy, bro. It never consistently happens. It's not.
You do have to have like a gearbox on them, and they have to start them, and there's lots of things about it. It could be like there's a tendency for it to process because of whatever, but these are also some, there's some credence to the idea that it's a parlor trick, and the way that they function and the way that they're used as this display, proving that we're moving. Whether you think if we're upside down, half the day, and right side up compared to where we were upside down. I mean, those are extreme claims that would need more than a pendulum to seem valid, right?
Well, I feel like we just jumped between like three separate thoughts here, and one of the thoughts was that the pendulum is precessing in the way that the Earth rotation predicts, but it could be explained by something else. But then someone said it's not processing in the way that Earth rotation predicts. It's just a parlor
Correct.
trick. And then you were saying that it alone is not sufficient to prove the Earth is rotating.
Yeah,
So
it
I feel like,
contradicts your experienced reality. I mean, it would have to be a lot more than just a pendulum that has two interpretations that could be valid, and the inconsistencies that
Yeah,
people are like trying to avoid.
yeah, none of
um,
these tests control for Earth spin. They just control for latitude. So the Earth spin part is unfalsifiable. You can just offer another dynamic explanation for it.
yeah, I didn't say that you couldn't offer other explanations. Um, I just said that this was something that was at least consistent. Like if the gyroscope didn't process at all, that would be a clear way to rule out the idea of the Earth rotating.
Well, it
Yeah,
wouldn't be
but I
either
can
way
equally.
necessarily, because like it's just a device that shows a reading of some sort. I mean, to say that we're spinning or not spinning would take a lot more than just this device with this very sensitive reading that our inner ears would probably detect as well to some degree. There would be something self-evident about flying through space. You would think there'd be one self-evident thing, which nobody has.
No, this completely flies in the face of like elliptical orbits or any asymmetry that you might find in the, you know, because it's like, well, because then this reverts right back to, well, all other motion is linear in space or whatever. It can't be detected. It's only the rotation that can be detected. All these other, all that
Yeah,
other
like the
motion
idea that
is
the
completely
argument
free
gets
fall.
into ZZ. It gets into the idea, well, if this three ring laser gyro or the interferometry is picking up some kind of a rotation, which it didn't, and that's the thing is that interferometry has been tested how many times? Millions of tests by Dayton Miller. I mean, if you really look into the history of this stuff, you'll be blown away with like the denialism that goes on to keep the globe alive. It's just it's beyond obvious.
I'm getting a little confused between jumping around between the rotation of the Earth versus the Earth's elliptical orbit. Um, I
Well, no, the idea is that these
The
sensitive
rotation.
instruments should pick up the orbit. You would think there'd be something about these other extreme movements that we'd be able to test when the only thing they're even worried about is this rotation with the 15 degrees, and that's all that they would expect. And there's a theoretical idea that it's so stretched out or whatever. But elliptical orbits do require acceleration, and if you're talking
Right.
about an acceleration and a change of direction at 67,000 miles an hour, there's no way to even imagine how drastic that could be if it was
At
that fast and that.
7.
so it it wouldn't be drastic. I wouldn't expect the acceleration of the elliptical orbit to be detectable by the same ring laser gyroscope that would pick up the Earth's rotation. I mean, I'm curious as to whether or not what people are saying here
But
is that
why? Why though? Why?
why? Because the acceleration values are so low with the elliptical orbit.
The speed is
Well,
67,000 miles an hour.
everyone
Yes.
thought MMX was 100 times more precise than it needed to be to detect that motion.
Well, MXX was an attempt to detect the ether wind. Um, but now we're
Hmm?
talking about whether or not you could detect the acceleration of the Earth as it goes around the elliptical orbit, and whether or not that should interfere with the ring laser gyroscope. And I'm not sure if the consensus here is that the 15 degree per hour shift on the ring laser gyroscope is a real measurement in the first place, or like are people saying
Yeah,
there's
but
an
it can.
alternative
It's
explanation, or am I
real. You can.
fake?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
real. You can just with equal justification, since the Earth spin was never controlled for, you can just offer, uh, another dynamic explanation, and it would be equally justified.
Yeah, and if you
Sure.
think that, by the way, if you think the rotation should be justifiable in some way, or it can't just be an unfalsifiable claim, then don't you think the orbit around the sun should be falsifiable as well?
Yeah, let me try to address all these things. So I don't know what to make of whoever was saying that the whole gyroscopic precession thing isn't even real. I'm pretty sure lots of amateurs have tested this, and we do see the 15 degree per hour shift. Uh, my only claim about it is that it is consistent with the theory that the Earth is rotating. Could it be explained by something else? Sure.
It's also consistent with the rotating cosmos, rotating universe.
Sure.
Sidereal rotation.
But I have other issues with that whole model. But like, yeah, okay. But anyway, the question of should we be able to pick up the acceleration of the ellipse of the Earth going around the sun?
Or just some
Right.
way to falsify the claim, the unfalsifiable claim that we're orbiting the sun. There should be something that's falsifiable about that if we're going to be honest with ourselves, right?
Yes, there is something that should be falsifiable about it, but I don't know exactly what the sensitivity threshold for it would be to detect. According to the modern theory of gravity, while you can't feel free fall acceleration, you can feel jerk within that free fall acceleration. You can feel a difference in the acceleration. So, because the Earth is an ellipse in the model and it goes further and closer to the sun, that difference should be detectable. The jerk, the change in acceleration,
And change in direction too for an elliptical orbit. You have a change in acceleration and a change in direction with a speed that's just unimaginable, 67,000 miles an hour. We can think of it as 1 year around the sun to minimize it in our minds conceptually,
Yeah.
but still the claim is 67,000 miles an hour with a change in orbit. And there's I don't know if you're aware of this, but even the Globers have brought this up as an argument, as if it were like something on their side. That would make sense, but literally there would be, when I talked to that CERN physicist, he was telling me there'd be a 2,000 mile an hour vector change in within 12 hours because we're going around the sun. There's a 2,000 mile per hour vector change that would have to happen if we're going around the sun. And he was using it as a way of saying, well, we don't feel the 2,000 mile an hour vector change, so why do you think we would worry about the rotation? You know, so it's not really a point on that side that helps.
Wait, where are you getting 2,000 from? I mean, the equator, the rotation speed at the velocity of the equator is 1,000 miles per hour. So if you're reversing direction over 12 hours, that's a 2,000 mile per hour change. But then the orbital speed's around the 67,000 miles per hour.
It has to do with the orbit. I'll send you something on that. It has to do with the change of 2,000 mile an hour vector because of the motion around the sun. And there's a graphic that helps like visualize it, what would actually be. But it's just another unfalsifiable claim. You know, that's the
Yeah,
point. I
definitely
mean, if
send me the
you're really
graphics
going
so I
around
can
the sun, you'd think there'd be something about it, especially with the extremes of it. Even if we can minimize it mathematically, just because we can kinematically conceive something as possible doesn't make it probable.
Well, even if the velocity numbers are big, that doesn't mean that the acceleration is big. Like if you were moving through space at 1,000,000 miles per hour and sped up to 10 million miles per hour, those are very big numbers. But if you sped up from 1,000,000 miles per hour to 10 million miles per hour over a decade, that's an incredibly tiny acceleration. It's, it's speed change divided by time. So if the speed change is happening over a long enough period of time, it's not that much acceleration.
Yeah, that's what I mean by the kinematic justification doesn't make it more probable.
I don't know what you mean by the kinematic justification.
Mathematical.
Like,
If you can mathematically derive that you wouldn't expect very much of a change if it was already at these ridiculously, high speeds, that you can theoretically say, oh, you wouldn't feel it because of the change and all that, that it's so big, it's so stretched out. It's just a kinematic mathematical explanation that makes it maybe seem more possible, but it doesn't make it more probable because you can do that with the kinematics.
I'm not quite following what
You're just
you
And
telling
you
us
wouldn't have any
more.
idea what the dynamic effects of that would actually be. You can conceptualize that it wouldn't be much of anything, but that's just the mathematical conceptual model. The whole thing is just constructed on kinematics. There's no dynamics at all. There's no dynamics to anything about the globe that's at all identifiable or testable. Doesn't that perk some kind of doesn't that raise an eyebrow at all?
I unsure I'm understanding. So we know what acceleration does to objects in a lab. Like I could take a ping pong ball and hit it with progressively greater amounts of force and look at how much it deforms under a slow motion camera. Like we know how physical objects respond to levels of force, levels of acceleration. And if the level of acceleration involved in the spin of the Earth or the Earth's ellipse around the sun is a tiny number, then of course I'm not going to expect it to be feelable in my senses or to be squishing the physical objects around me or anything like that.
No,
So
I'm
you're
not
just
saying you should expect it. I'm saying there's no well, what's the difference between kinematics and dynamics? Let's just get at that. Well, what do you think the difference is?
It's the description of motion versus the causal explanation of forces.
Yeah, so if you have to actually use the forces, and there's things about like all of these different motions that would have forces involved, that you would think there'd be something about the globe model, the idea that we're moving in all these different directions, that would have some kind of dynamic effect that we can say is like testable. But if
yeah,
if it's just a
you're pretty
kinematic
much
mathematical
telling us
explanation, it doesn't
why.
make it more probable.
Yeah, you're pretty much telling us why it's undetectable and unfalsifiable, and
I
we're
didn't say it was
already trying to tell you
unfalsifiable. I
that.
just said it is falsifiable because it should be there. It should just be very minute. A sensitive enough detector should be able to detect the very small amounts of acceleration and jerk that is occurring to the Earth as it spins and as it goes around its elliptical orbit. I'm just saying why I wouldn't expect to feel it like in my body at the threshold of
Wait,
like
so you're
1
saying you think there should be an instrument that should detect the orbit?
Yes.
Okay,
So that
what is
goes
it?
against relativity.
Uh, no, this is a nuance that a lot of people, when talking about relativity, do just simply get wrong. So, prior to Einstein, the thinking in physics was that you could not directly detect constant linear velocity, but you could detect with an accelerometer acceleration. What changes with Einstein's theory of gravity is that in Einstein's theory of gravity, you also cannot detect constant acceleration. So previously, they would have said that linear constant velocity feels the same as stationary, but acceleration feels different. Einstein says, in addition to that, free fall constant acceleration should also be undetectable. However, jerk, that is the change of acceleration, should be detectable. So people get this wrong when they describe what Einstein's theory says. It does say that a constant amount of free fall acceleration should not be detectable, but a change in the acceleration is still detectable. So
You have a
yes,
change in direction too.
any change in acceleration. So change in the magnitude of acceleration or change in the direction of acceleration.
So
Just
this,
a
this
change.
does depart from mainstream though that says we can't detect Earth's orbital velocity. So I know you're saying the jerk, right?
Yeah. It is. I think it's sloppy explanations because if the Earth was on a perfectly circular orbit around the sun, and the Earth was infinitely small, a single point, then it would be experiencing a constant gravitational acceleration. So, according to Einstein's theory, that would not be detectable. But that's not the case because the Earth is not on a perfectly circular orbit. In the model, it's on an elliptical orbit, so the Earth gets closer and further away from the sun over time, and the Earth is not a point. One side of the Earth in daytime is closer to the sun than the other side of the Earth in nighttime. So the fact that different parts of the Earth are at different distances from the sun, and that the Earth gets closer and further from the sun over its elliptical orbit, means that there isn't constant acceleration. So that would be detectable. It would be
So
extremely minute, but it is in theory detectable. And this is
eh,
something that people flatly get wrong with an oversimplification when they
But there's no
stop at
test to
acceleration.
detect it, right? So you're saying
There
it
is.
should be falsifiable because it should be detectable. We don't have any way of doing that, right?
I
No
mean, in
obstacle tests.
principle, with a long enough spring, I don't know, draped over the Earth, uh, really,
Huh.
really shielded from any other types of vibrations, we should be able to see some extremely subtle stretching effects within it that happen over the course um, of a year as the Earth gets closer and further from the sun. Yeah, but it would be a tiny effect.
Or it could be that we're stationary and there's an ether and it all makes way more sense.
It could be that. I don't think that makes more sense, but it could be that.
At least you're a lot more open-minded than most Globers. I did find it very surprising when we were talking about the planes, though, that you said that a plane that takes off at 500 miles an hour latitude would have the conserved momentum to just circle around where it took off from, like indefinitely, and still be going eastward tangentially at 500 miles an hour without that speed affecting or being affected by its circular motion. Like, why would the plane be going eastward tangentially at 500 miles an hour indefinitely as it circles around with all of those forces, that would be directly working, to lessen or get rid of the conserved momentum that we assumed would be there.
Um, like if I'm on a train and it's going forward at a very fast speed, and I've got like a ball on the end of a string and I swirl it around in a circle. Okay, now the ball is going around the circle on the end of the string that's I'm holding with my hand. So it's circling around my hand, but also I and the ball and everything in the train is going forward with the train. So we can have circular motion around a center point while that center point also moves forward in some direction of space.
Yeah, but when you take the plane off the ground, the claim is it's in a non-inertial reference frame compared to an inertial reference frame, or the other way around. So we have two separate reference frames. Like the claim is that you wouldn't see the ground moving below you, and you go up on a hot air balloon because you have the conserved momentum. But then that's why I always bring up going into a different latitude where you start talking about banking east to keep up with the motion of the Earth, which means that you're in a separate reference frame that needs to do something about the rotation, and that's where it starts to get contradictory. And I mean, this is something that's separated. If you're talking about being in the train or inside a cabin of a plane, it's a totally different environment to begin with, and it's one reference frame because it's all enclosed and it's on the Earth. When you get off the Earth, then there's a totally different set of things that are now applied, where you have to either keep up with the rotation or you have to excuse the idea that it looks like it's stationary because of the conserved momentum. But if you have forces that are working an opposite of that assumed motion, like a plane accelerating to the west, to imagine that it's still going eastward at that same rate is purely conceptual and flawed if you think that the motion is actually going on in a separate reference frame now rather than being on the Earth. And treating it the same is, scientifically flawed. I would imagine you would think that.
Well, to take the analogy I used of the ball on the string on the train, it's not very far from me for me to go from that to imagining, okay, myself on the earth and my feet are planted on the ground, and I'm going around with the earth, and I'm also swinging the ball on the end of the string. Okay, now we get to the plane. Um, I mean, the plane's an active object. It's powered. I mean, anything the plane is doing is some choice of how the pilot is, tilting the wings and firing the engines of the plane. So why couldn't the pilot, just keep circling the same spot on the ground as that spot on the ground goes around the earth? Like, I'm not quite seeing what the problem is with the
Because it's not,
pilot.
it's no longer on the ground. So they had that, then it's treated as something that is only going with the ground because it was on the ground, right? So then if it goes in the air, then it's only got the conserved momentum from being on the ground. And then if you have a force acting against that conserved momentum, like the plane flying in the opposite direction or around in circles, to assume that same speed would be going on independently, dynamically, somehow, like that it's separated from the dynamic motions of the plane itself, doesn't add up. I mean, that's just an assumption and not even scientifically sound.
Well, okay, I mean, this is what I'm thinking. The plane starts on the ground, and let's say the ground's going east at 500 miles per hour. So the plane is going east at 500 miles per hour. And then the plane takes off and it speeds up, forward faster than the ground. So now it's going 100 miles per hour faster than the ground. So 600 in total, because it was at 500 with the ground and now it's 100 miles per hour faster. And then it turns around and goes the other way. So now it's going 100 miles per hour west compared to the ground. So 400 miles per hour east in total. And still going east, it's just not going east as fast as the ground. So it looks like it's going west now from the ground's perspective. Then it goes back a little bit and it turns around and goes forward again. Like I mean, once the plane is up in the air, the plane can change its momentum with its engines. So I'm not saying that the plane is locked in at the same momentum that it had while it was on the ground. That's just the starting amount it had. Of course, once the pilot turns the engines of the plane on and the plane is propelling itself, it can change its momentum in any way it wants. I was just saying, I
Yeah,
don't.
I thought you said indefinitely. It could circle indefinitely. It'd still be going with the ground at 500 miles an hour.
I mean, if it's an active choice of the pilot, I mean, it's the pilot has to choose to keep the plane going in a circle around a point in the ground. I mean, all I'm saying is that if the plane has fuel, I don't see what the issue
Wait, no,
is for
wait.
the pilot.
The pilot's not taught about any kind of rotation. I mean, the pilot's just taught to treat the Earth as stationary no matter where it goes. When it lands, everything. There's no rotation included in any training manual. There's nothing about any kind of curvature either. It's just as if it's stationary. I know we went back and forth about this, and you assumed that they must do something to keep up with the Earth, but that's not
No,
in
I
the
said
manual.
when you're changing latitude, they must do something, because if you take off from a
Yeah,
place where
not in
the
any
ground,
case, right?
yeah,
But it
not
seemed
in
like
every.
you were just keeping this 500 as like a number in your head that would be perpetual, and they could just circle around, and then that 500 would just stay indefinitely with the plane.
Well, no, I was saying is if the plane takes off from a spot on the ground and doesn't change latitude, right? It's just going to fly back and
Yeah.
forth over the same spot of the ground. It started at 500, and then it goes up to 600, and then it goes down to 400, and then it goes back to 600, and then it goes back to 400. It is changing its momentum, but it's just, changing its momentum a bit above and a bit below the ground velocity back and forth.
Yeah, but you're just keeping the 500 there as a number. It's just purely conceptual. We're assuming it's still going with the Earth, but then it's plus 100 or minus 100, when really it's just plus 100 minus 100 over a stationary Earth. To think that the conserved momentum would just continue on when you said just now that the engines themselves would change the momentum that it had. You're saying that they would dynamically exist independently of each other. I mean, we have vector mass. If it's going 500 miles an hour eastward, that momentum, that actual speed that we're claiming that the plane is going, would have an effect on all the other dynamics that are going on with the plane in the air that's independent of the Earth.
I don't. All I meant was if the plane is it starts at some starting value of momentum, and then it can speed up to go faster than the Earth, or turn around and go the other way. So now it's going slower than the Earth. I just meant it start
Yeah, but that's just conceptual. You're holding on to that momentum as if like with the Earth, and it just stays consistent. When it's supposed to be going because it was on the Earth and then it's in the air, and the momentum's conserved, not attached.
Yeah, well, okay, so before getting to the plane, what if we just did start with a hot air balloon? Okay, so no wind relative to the ground. So we're floating in a hot air balloon over the ground, and the ground is moving 500 miles per hour east, and the hot air balloon is right over the spot of the ground where it took off from. And it's also going at 500 miles per hour east. So it's staying over the same point of the ground. Um, I don't see anything that's going to change there. The ground is going at a speed and the hot air balloon is going at the same speed. So it's always going to be over that same spot of the ground.
You're saying the dynamic effects of anything that the hot air balloon or plane do, they're not going to change that original momentum when it's a dynamic claim that the plane's moving along with the Earth, which is a moving through the air that would be changed dynamically by anything that the plane does with the engines, with the winds going in the opposite direction. I mean, I would argue that if the plane took off right at the same latitude and tried to land right where it took off from, as soon as it took off, it already would be out of sync, because conserved momentum isn't like forever lasting. It's like, I
Well,
mean, you have that one demonstration of the ping pong ball going up with one linear direction and landing back down in the cart where it took off from. Yeah, that
yeah.
works in one linear direction. We that's true, but that doesn't mean that the plane holds on to that 500 mile an hour eastward rotation tangentially, which is also a problem because you have to imagine it's also moving with the Earth, in a tangential motion rather than just straight across linearly. So, I mean, there's all kinds of problems with the idea that it would even be there to begin with, but to think that it would just dynamically remain independent of all the dynamic things the plane does, it confuses me that you would think that that would be possible.
Well, I did say that the plane is changing what its momentum is. I'm just like, let's stick with the hot air balloon here, right? So like there's no wind over the ground. So the hot air balloon from a ground perspective looks like it's just floating right over that point of the ground. But the ground is moving and the hot air balloon is moving. So the hot air balloon and the ground are moving at the same velocity. Okay, so like now let's say I'm on the hot air balloon and I've got a fan and like I blow it one way and the hot air balloon picks up some speed in one direction. And then I have the fan blow in the other direction. And like I could make the hot air balloon jiggle back and forth, like gain a bit of speed to the right, gain a bit of speed to the left. But it still just changes, plus and minuses of a fairly small amount on top of that starting momentum that it had, which was the same velocity.
But don't you see how you're just holding on to that momentum as like a thing that's never changing, and you can just add or subtract from it, and it's just a conception that you're holding on to rather than anything dynamic?
Well, I think what I'm saying is that the momentum something has at a later moment of time is the momentum it had in an earlier moment of time plus any speed change. So we started with a 500 mile per hour velocity, and I can gain or subtract some speed. But if I only gain and subtract small amounts of speed, then I'm not going to be that far off from the starting value of 500. I guess that's what you mean
Well,
by
yeah, but it's still conceptual. You're not. There's no dynamics to it whatsoever. You're just
I don't
assuming
know.
that it's moving along with the Earth, and then plus or minus the actual
Yeah.
speeds. But then we're also assuming it's still going eastward, which is totally undetectable, unmeasurable, and this pilot doesn't have any idea that that's going on. But then let's say it's like, okay, let's take the more extreme, just to blow it out of the water, and you have a 2,000 mile an hour jet flying, west southwest around the Earth, you know, towards the equator. Now it gets to the equator, it's gone 2,000 mile an hour, the opposite direction completely from the original conserved momentum of 500. When it gets to the equator, are you assuming that now that jet that flew to the equator, west southwest at 2,000 mile an hour, is still going 500 mile an hour eastward somehow?
It's like before we get to the jet, I just want to say, um, I'm thinking of the plane flying around in a circle over a point on the Earth as really no different at all than like if I'm on a train going at a fairly fast speed and I've got like a toy drone and I'm having the drone fly up and down, the aisle of the train. Like I really don't see what you're seeing as fundamentally different about the plane or the hot air balloon doing circles over a point on the ground any different than a drone doing circles around the aisle of a train that's moving forward. It's like the drone already
Well, we
got
have a
up.
compartment that's enclosed. It's a different environment. It's not comparable. It's a non sequitur. Just that it's a closed cabin. It's one reference frame because it's still within that closed cabin, and that's the reason I go to the tangential velocity gradient, where now it has to pick up speed to go faster eastward to stay with the Earth. And now we're treating that conserved momentum as if it's helping something, and that the dynamics of the plane can either add to, it's like this. Oh, we still have that 500, so now we're going to add to it by doing something dynamically with the plane. Whereas before, nothing you did with the dynamics of the plane changed the 500 whatsoever. But we can add to it when we need to, when we go to the 1,000 mile. It's like
Yeah,
it changes completely the way you're treating it once we get to these higher.
yeah. So yeah, to be clear, if we're just talking about the plane doing small circles around the same point on the ground, I am treating that the same as like having a drone fly around the inside of a train. But if we're talking about it moving from one latitude to another latitude, that's a different situation. And I agreed that and maybe people have been saying something contradictory to this. So then I disagree with them, but that is falsifiable. An accelerometer on a plane would have to pick that up. So if a plane takes off from the Arctic Circle, where the tangential speed of the ground is said to be 500 miles per hour, and then it lands on the equator, where the tangential speed is 1,000 miles per hour. If I have a sensitive enough accelerometer on the plane and I read off the log of all the velocity changes of the plane, it needs to add up to a plus 500 mile per hour increase. Absolutely.
Well, they have it as yeah, that's a good idea, and it should if there was an independent way of testing that. And what, like I said, the results I got was that it would actually slow down. It would have a peak as soon as it takes off, and then it would actually start to decay towards the equator, and then it kind of lines up with what they predict about the pendulums having no precession at the equator, and that it would be zero. It would show zero acceleration at the equator, and that seems kind of counterintuitive to the idea that it's faster. But regardless, they have it all tied into the INS system, the internal navigation system, and then that locks to the idea that we're on a globe with a spherical graticule. So it's an internally consistent idea that if they're following a ground path, that you could assume they're moving faster because that's what the globe says it's moving at the time, even though it's not detectable or provable in any way. Look at the ground path that lines up with the spherical graticule. So that's how they would probably answer that if you actually looked into it. But regardless, that's why I take the ground path away and make it just a joyriding pilot that's going to be able to treat the Earth as stationary, doing big loops at 2,000 miles an hour all over the Earth and landing at the equator where the conserved momentum would only be 500 if you imagine that still be.
Yeah, I think the point about the INS and the ground path is just that's why pilots don't have to actively think about it. They just need to the thing that the pilots train.
Yeah, it gives them the out. It gives them the out. It's like, oh, it's at this latitude and the ground and the spherical graticule is spherical, right? So it must be moving that fast because it followed a ground path. And yeah, he didn't consciously bank east to get there, but he followed the ground path that shows he went east. So there you go. So that's why I make it a west-southwest direction with no ground path whatsoever. He's not correcting for anything. We have only westward winds, no eastward winds whatsoever, and he still lands as if it's stationary.
Well, I don't think that that's the case then. Like, I think that in what you're describing, the pilot arrives over the equator and is going extremely fast over the ground, like probably too fast to make a safe landing, but I don't really know a lot about
Great. Then he takes out his camera and proves the Earth's rotating and flat Earth would never have been a thing. If the Earth rotated independently of the plane in any way, at any point, at any time, there would be tons of video of people putting their cameras out the window and showing that there's an eastward rotation that can't be mistaken by the plane's movement over the Earth. It would be completely consistent, going eastward faster, and just drifts of wind moving the plane would not compare to that movement you could observe. And we'd have all kinds of situations where the pilot had to make an emergency detour moving faster in one direction, and he's got winds to deal with and plane crashes because he can't land on a moving surface. But the globe's claim is just that the air moves with the Earth, which we agreed would never work because there's slippage with fluid dynamics. So they can't claim the whole of the atmosphere moves completely consistently with the Earth. Probably just a very thin layer at the very, very surface. If we're getting real about it, if it was actually rotating, that would be all you'd get. You wouldn't get the whole of it. And then they claim millions of years, and then it's all moving because of that long of a time. So it's all moving together at that point. And then comparisons with the blender, which is nothing at all comparable to experience. There's no motion whatsoever detectable. You can't ever show the ground surface moving faster than the plane. The scenario I drew out is just to make people realize that never happens, and that can't not never happen, because even if the air were moving perfectly in lockstep, there's no dynamics to it whatsoever. You can't imagine the air carrying the plane to be in sync with the Earth if it's not a wind, and they don't even claim it's a wind. The only air pushing the plane dynamically are winds. You can't just say that the concept of the air moving with the Earth makes it all in sync. That means all the clouds, all the birds, all the balloons, all the planes are moved, like all of their dynamics stay in relation to each other exactly the same in a static relationship equal. But then they just use the concept that because the air is thought to move with the earth, even though they have to admit it wouldn't be perfect, that it's all staying perfect at the same time. So there's a inherent contradiction, which is why I talk about planes proving that we're not moving more than anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, we agreed. I mean that there's slippage in the upper atmosphere, so the atmosphere, like the fluid dynamics of the atmosphere, wouldn't rotate rigidly with the Earth. I
But that's what they claim. That's the official claim that it's so rigid and it moves everything without any dynamics. So they're not saying that there's an eastward wind that pushes the plane faster eastward. They're just saying the idea that the air moves and the plane's in the air. So we just think about it as in sync, even though the plane can't even be that it's perfect lockstep. So it's all completely debunked right there in my mind.
so I'm glad we're getting a chance to talk in person because I feel like there's something happening in this conversation around the word wind that is confusing me. So like when a skydiver jumps out of a plane and releases their parachute, what's slowing them down? Well, it's the air getting caught in the parachute. What does that feel like to the skydiver? It feels like an upward wind. It feels like an upward gust of air against them. But from the ground, we would say, no, the air isn't rushing up. It's the skydiver falling through the air down. And because they're falling through the air, there's all this friction against the air of the parachute capturing the air inside it, and that slows them down. But it definitely, like, I don't think it's wrong for the skydiver to think of that as like, oh, like there's an upward jet of air that's slowing my fall because like that's what it feels like to them. Um,
Oh, but you're saying basically, yeah, with my scenario that I draw out, it goes west southwest. There's only westward winds, that he's detecting. There's no dynamics pushing him faster eastward. So you're saying that the Earth would actually be moving independently eastward, and we'd be able to take a camera out and prove the Earth rotates then, right?
well, one thing I'm saying is that even if we say that there's westward winds, the air is actually moving to the east. Because if the ground
But
is
that's still a
moving,
concept. That's still just conceptual. That's an unfalsifiable claim.
well, I'm just saying that's what it would mean on the rotating Earth. Like, if the
Yeah,
Earth is
but there's
staying
no
straight,
dynamics to back that whatsoever, and no dynamics that actually move the plane eastward faster. You can say because the air is moving eastward, we can assume that the plane's moving eastward, but there's no dynamics. The only dynamics of air that the plane detects are winds, and then they say that the winds themselves are also moving eastward at that exact same pace. So it's just moving it in a kinematic concept rather than having any dynamic explanation. And they have to admit that the dynamics really wouldn't work that way because the layers as you go up would have slippage if it was rotating.
uh, okay, let me put it this way. So let's say we're living on a stationary Earth, and there's a 200 mile per hour westward wind, and the plane is flying west at 300 miles per hour. So the plane is flying west faster than the winds are rushing west. What does that feel like to the plane? That feels like air blowing at 100 miles per hour east into the face of the plane because the plane's moving west faster than the wind. So it's not like if the wind is blowing 200 miles per hour west and the plane is going 300 miles per hour west, the plane doesn't feel air pushing it from behind at 200 miles per hour. It's running headfirst into the air. So it feels air slashing into the face of the plane. I mean, it's just like a motorcyclist, getting like the air blowing their hair back. Like the motorcycle could be going in the same direction that the wind is blowing, but if they're going faster than the wind is blowing, then their experience of the air is that it's rushing the other way compared to themselves. At least that's what it
Yeah. And so
feels
you're
like.
saying that on a stationary Earth, that's what happens. Now, what's your point?
Well, no, well, I'm just making the point of what the air feels like to the plane. So my point is that, yeah, so even if we say that there is a westward wind, um, that doesn't mean that the plane is going to feel a push to the west. The the plane could still feel a push of the air back to the east, depending on how the plane is moving through the air.
Well, anyway, so but the scenario I drew out, you said that you think that it wouldn't work for the plane to not have a moving ground, that it would have to figure out how to catch up to eastward to be able to land safely. But the Globe claim is that it would be perfectly in sync still somehow. What do you think of that?
Well, I don't really understand that claim, or what people meant when they said it, because like landing is obviously a pretty active process. Like I've been in planes that like bank and circle and line themselves up to the runway, so I've never
Yeah,
been
from
in a
the
plane.
air. So if dealing with the winds as well as a rotating Earth that goes consistently eastward would be two things to deal with.
Well,
Winds
it's not
can have a
just like
similar effect, but having a consistent eastward rotation that you have to stay in sync with and deal with winds pushing you in all directions would be two things to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I just mean like most of the time I've ever been on a plane, the plane is coming in hot. You know, it's got to do a whole bunch of things to prepare itself for landing, to adjust its speed and its direction for the runaway. So I don't even understand what it means to say that the plane stays perfectly in sync. And
Yeah,
like,
because it's always perfectly in sync. If it had to somehow keep up an eastward tangential velocity, especially if it's aiming westward when it's landing on some angle against the spin, then if it had to somehow keep its dynamic, eastward, conserve momentum plus whatever the dynamics the pilot adds on or whatever, however those ratios work out, and the guy that thinks it's rotating, it doesn't matter. You can't keep the plane moving backwards with the rotation at the 1,000 mile an hour, whatever needed to add on to the 500. There's no way to accelerate backwards and slow down forwards and treat the Earth as if it's stationary.
no, this was something we disagreed about. I said the plane definitely can accelerate backwards, which is the same thing as saying it's slowed down as it goes forward. By like same with the parachute the example here. Uh, the person falling who they're falling down and they're always falling down, but they dramatically reduce their downward speed when they release their parachute. So, like when I see plane wings like tilting to a new angle, I don't know a lot about planes, but I assume what's happening there is that they're using the plane kind of like a parachute to like catch the air again, to slow them down. Or like I don't know, I've been on a bike before,
By the way, you're
and
saying the pilot has some awareness of the rotation of Earth and has to time his landing that has something to do with it rotating?
well, the pilot is looking at how fast it looks like the plane is moving in comparison to the ground. So,
And the ground is always stationary from what the pilot can tell.
well, definitely not, because the plane's moving quickly over the ground. So the ground
No,
looks like
the
it's
pilot
actually
doesn't see the ground as moving. He knows the difference between his plane moving over a stationary ground and the plane moving over an eastward rotating ground. That would be
Dude,
two
I don't even
different
get that.
things.
I don't even understand that. I mean, we get to this point a lot in the conversation, but like I don't even understand what that means of what the
Because
difference is.
because think about it. Like, okay, so you have that plane that can fly, or that jet that can fly 2,000 miles an hour, right? He flies all the way to the equator against the spin. Now the rotation of Earth is supposed to be 500 miles an hour, faster than the conserved momentum we imagined he had from the start. Those planes can also hover in midair with 40,000 pounds of thrust resistance. So then he gets to the equator and he hovers, right? Now, what's making the ground move 500 miles an hour below him? Are you saying that the Earth would all of a sudden just look stationary because he's hovering?
I mean, when you say hovering, you mean that you're holding the same position over the ground. So then, yeah,
The Earth is stationary no matter what happens, right? But you were saying that the Earth would actually be fast if he was going the opposite direction and there was no eastward winds. The Globe says because the air moves with the ground, the plane's always kept in sync and there'd be no way to know. That's the unfalsifiable claim, which you're admitting is not the case. You're saying you would see the rotation, but now you're saying he wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the rotation of the Earth and the plane moving over the stationary Earth if it's moving.
yeah, I don't even know what the difference would be. Like when I'm in a car,
Because
or
one would be like in gusts of wind in each and every direction, might make the plane drift one way or another. But if there was a consistent rotation eastward, that movement would be fully distinguishable from the winds moving the plane or the plane itself going in one direction. If it's going perpendicular
I don't know,
to the eastward rotation, you'd be able to tell the difference between a gust of wind that might make it the illusion of a sideways moving Earth totally different than the consistent eastward rotation that's supposed to be 500 miles an hour faster than where he took off from.
Yeah, no, I agree. We'd tell the difference between a gust of wind and a steady motion. But I'm just thinking, like, when I'm on a train or something, I'm looking at the ground and it looks like it's rushing by. Like I'm watching, power line poles and trees and stuff. And to me, it looks like they're rushing by the other way. And when I look out the window of a plane, it looks like the ground is moving. Now, I guess I haven't paid very close attention to um, how much of that motion is along the direction of the plane versus
Yeah,
sideways.
you'd be able, but you realize you'd be able to tell the difference between a steady motion and a gust of wind. I thought you said a minute ago that the pilot sees the ground moving as if he interprets it as the ground moving. You don't think about the ground moving when you're on a train. You know it's a train because you know that the train's moving and not the ground. So
No,
the
I think
pilot
of it.
doesn't think about the ground moving because it's rotating. He may see his own motion over a stationary ground and think that he's in sync because of the globe says he's in sync, but there's no dynamics to it whatsoever. It's just completely unfalsifiable. And actually, I think it makes it falsifiable because we would see that rotation. He wouldn't be able to land. He wouldn't be able to fly the plane backwards as he's slowing down forwards, even if you can interpret, slowing down as a backwards motion. That's totally different than trying to keep up with 1,000-mile-an-hour rotation backwards consistently as you land in a forwards angle against the spin. That's totally two different things. So you're taking the
So,
concept and then replacing it for the whole dynamics of it as if that makes
so there's enough different ideas I'd have to think through more, like continue to think through carefully in talking about like the plane coming in at an angle over a different latitude, and all of these different factors. But to just get to something a little bit more basic, like if I am on a train, like I look around at the train interior and it looks stationary, and I look at the ground outside and it looks like it's moving. The tracks are rushing underneath me. The trees are rushing backwards to which way I'm
Yeah.
facing if I'm facing forward. Um,
That's what the globe does. It takes one linear direction of something we know to be true, with you don't feel one linear direction of a plane moving 500 miles an hour, forward. But that doesn't mean that you could be moving all these different directions or go different latitudes and all these other things that dynamically are just assumed to be part of that same one linear concept that we know to be true. They use that little small example as a way of like, oh, yeah, we could be going around the sun and we could be, going 500,000 miles an hour, being dragged by the sun and through the galaxy, and all the other things are totally excusable because we don't fully feel the speed of a plane, going in one linear direction. It's just a jump to ridiculousness, I think. And maybe it's once you
Ridiculousness is that
thought about it long enough.
these the ridiculousness new perspective is these ballers think that the atmosphere is in lockstep with the Earth. They think they can use their simple analogy of the fly in the plane, but the plane is an enclosed system. The Earth is
Yeah.
moving with not an enclosed system. There's something called wind and friction.
And they have to admit that the fluid dynamics wouldn't allow it to be in lockstep anyway. And we have jet streams that go, 200, make it go way faster than the supposed rotation. So once you jump out of the jet stream, is the pilot then taught, well, now you've been going faster than the rotation. You better make sure you're in sync with the Earth when you're going to land again. None of that. I mean, there's all kinds of circumstances where the dynamics wouldn't add up, and then they'd have to have special training for these pilots to be able to land on a moving Earth. If that was even a slim possibility, they would have special training and caster wheels for the plane and a big huge lot for them to like spin in whatever direction the momentum might have taken them when they land. They land in one linear direction because the Earth is stationary. They can only land as if it's stationary with the tangential velocity gradient But they can only land if it's actually stationary. They can only treat it that way if it's actually stationary. They can't just
But
pretend that it's in lockstep and then
do
admit it's not at the same time.
Well, I'm not saying it's the atmosphere's in lockstep, and planes do land at angles to the runway. But like also, I feel like more to the point, like, okay, we take your pilot who flies southwest and never banks east, and yeah, I guess I would expect that they're going to look down and see the ground moving rather quickly, and if they try to land like that, they'll get splattered. Um, so they're probably not going to try to land like that. They'll probably take some active maneuvers to adjust their speed and accelerate to the east before they try to land so that it doesn't look like the ground is rushing by underneath them. Um,
Well, great. Welcome to flat Earth. They never do that.
Well, but what do you mean they never do that? I mean, like, I've only ever been on commercial jets where if a pilot got that fast a velocity in comparison to the ground, like, that would be like national news and crazy dangerous and stuff. Like, we don't have commercial pilots doing like insane stuff like that. They keep to a very rigid set of instructions that they follow. So, like, of course, I've never seen that on a commercial flight.
What do you mean? You just said that you thought that there'd be points where a pilot might see the ground moving eastward and have to adjust for that rotation. If that ever
Yeah,
happened ever, then we
and
would
then they
know about it. And if it couldn't happen ever, it would happen all the time.
No, what I'm saying it's I'm on a plane and the plane is flying and the pilot's tracking the ground below and the ground is starting to move faster below relative to the plane, so they adjust and they bring down that difference. And the reason it's not going to look very dramatic to me as a passenger on the plane is because they've been adjusting the entire time that they're flying, and like they're not
No, that's
going
the
to
thing. That never happens. They never see the ground moving eastward. I mean, you just said that you thought they would adjust based on the rotation. They never have to do that. They just see a stationary Earth relative to the plane's movement. They always treat it as stationary. There's nothing in any pilot manual that will say anything about adjusting for rotation with a tangential velocity gradient, which would be a problem. I agree. It would be a big problem if the Earth were rotating. But because it's not a problem or even thought of or even mentioned, it proves to me that the Earth can't be rotating because that would be a problem, which you agree with.
I don't know what you mean by they never see it. Like, planes do slide slip to the ground. Like, there are definitely times where a pilot is monitoring that the plane is moving sideways to the ground and they take corrective measures to bring that sideways motion of the plane back into sync with the ground.
That's only with like a crosswind. It's only relevant to wind.
You just said they're not in sync with the ground. When they correct for a ground path, the ground path is treated as stationary as well. They don't think about it as correcting for the rotation. That's why I make it no ground path. He could do big loop-de-loops at 1,000 miles an hour faster than the rotation and big, huge circles all over the place. He could just intentionally try to get out of the sync with the Earth. And then he could just take his camera and show that the Earth is moving faster eastward than his plane is tangentially as he hovers. And that would have been done, or would be, if that were even close to possible in any smidge of time, we would know that that happens, and it would be a problem they would have to deal with. Or people would be seeing it all the time when they're going in a south flight and they see the ground moving eastward because the pilot decided to, or it's an emergency situation where he has no ground path to correct for. And then there would be all kinds of problems because he wouldn't be correcting for a ground path. So it seems like you're conflating it with the idea of correcting for a ground path and then admitting, and then it's at the same time saying that he would see the ground moving faster eastward to adjust for it, which are two separate things.
Someone else had a thing they wanted to get in.
The only time that they correct for stuff like that is like crosswind for landing. That's it.
Yeah. If they had to deal with the moving Earth and crosswinds in an opposite direction, that would be noticeable and provable that the Earth rotates because they would have to do two things, like an aircraft pilot has to account for the drift of the boat as well as the winds. It's two things that they have to be specially trained for.
So, like, if the plane is moving sideways to the ground, then that, how is that going to feel any different to the plane as just another crosswind?
I didn't say it would feel different. I'm saying if it was consistent motion eastward, perpendicular to the plane's motion, and then he had winds blowing him two different, all different directions, like a swirling wind that's making him go all over the place. Well, if he doesn't keep up his eastward tangential velocity, that's 500 miles an hour faster than where he took off from, the ground would just be moving out from underneath him because the winds are moving in all directions.
Well, but the winds, no, I mean, the winds, you might say, are moving in a bunch of different directions, but um, those are deviations from the overall motion of the atmosphere, which would then predominantly be to the east. So, like, even if we say that the wind is blowing west, the atmosphere is still moving to the east within
That's the concept.
right?
That's
Yeah.
just an unfalsifiable concept that you keep in your head, like the momentum. There's no, I mean, if you could keep the idea that the air is moving the plane still eastward, even though he does circles, just like you kept the idea that the conserved momentum is keeping him going eastward, and even though he does circles, it's unaffected by that. It's like keeping these two different dynamic ideas mutually exclusive when they wouldn't be, because you're also saying he would have to do something to bank east dynamically to keep up with the Earth, but then he wouldn't have to because the air is moving with the Earth anyway. So it's like have your cake and eat it too.
I mean, it's we're throwing in a lot of variables here, but okay. So if I imagine that the plane is flying in a low enough layer of the atmosphere that we could say that the atmosphere is moving in sync with the ground, which might not be true, but it's going to get more complicated for me to think about this if we complicate it. So let me just at the very least address the simple case of pretend that the atmosphere is moving in sync with the ground and the plane is flying south, and as the plane flies south, both the ground and the atmosphere are moving tangentially to the east faster and faster. Then that's just going to the plane feel like an eastward crosswind. And I
Yeah,
don't know
but
why that.
that's why I make the scenario only westward winds, right? He doesn't ever feel any eastward crosswind that keeps him up with the Earth. That's not even the claim. The Globe claims it's not a wind at all. They just say that the air moves with the Earth in lockstep, even though they have to admit it's not in lockstep. So we got a plane that flies at a very high altitude, west southwest, against the spin the whole time. There's only westward winds that he knows of. He gets to the equator, and you're saying he'd be in perfect lockstep, so, or he would have to do something to correct for this rotation.
No,
Yeah,
I
ZZ, if you don't want complicated, just assume a stationary Earth.
Yeah,
It's actually
if he treats it
Yeah,
as stationary, and all of the movements of the plane, the ground speed is in relation to a stationary Earth. If we had a tangential velocity gradient, it would be in relation to a moving Earth that's moving faster than where he took off from, and all those readings wouldn't be the same. You're flying from point A to point B as if it's stationary, and if the point B is 1,000 miles an hour, and you're starting out with a tangential velocity of 200 mile an hour eastward, conceptually imagined, whatever. But if the city you're flying to is moving at 1,000 miles an hour, it would make the total distance completely longer. Because like think about it, if you have like a guy on the outside of a racetrack and he's running consistently at 1,000 miles an hour. Now you can run 400 miles an hour max. That's the max you can run, right? You start at the race starts, but your objective is to catch the guy that's going 1,000 miles an hour. How are you ever going to catch the guy running at 1,000 miles an hour if you can only run 400 miles an hour?
Are you saying that the person running 1,000 miles per hour is the ground, and the person going 400 miles per hour is the plane?
Well, the claim is that the equator moves 1,000 miles an hour, right? If you took off from the pole, which is 0 miles an hour eastward, right? Then the city you're flying towards is moving faster than you were starting out at 0. So how are you going to catch the 1,000 mile an hour city?
The plane's going to pick up that speed. It's going to have to gain 1,000 miles per hour of eastward speed.
Yeah, but he doesn't do any of that. He just flies as if it's stationary right straight there.
Well, you're saying that, but like
That's
I'm
how
not.
the Globe claims. That's
Well,
what the
I'm
Globe
not.
claims. They don't say eastward winds or any kind of dynamics whatsoever. They just say that they just give you the concept of the air moving with the Earth in lockstep, even though they have to admit it's not, and all of that. And there's just a concept that it's in sync, and there's nothing dynamically trained for the pilot to do anything other than treat it as stationary.
It's actually not in sync. It's actually moving faster. So another thought experiment we could think about is we've got 3 different velocities, right? Or 3 different mediums to think about. So let's say you've got the ether or the vacuum of space, and that's, you know, that true stationary. That's our true baseline. And then you've got the movement of the Earth. So the Earth is moving west to east. But then they also say that actually the what do you call the trade winds? That the trade winds are actually also moving west to east. So in actuality, when you're flying this plane, what you would actually experience is you would experience a crosswind where the crosswind is pushing you west to east. So it would be accelerating you in front of where the Earth is rotating. So in actual fact, you would experience the opposite of the Earth rotating beneath you. Where instead of the
times,
ground standing, so if you're flying north. So if you're flying north to south around the equator, the wind would be pushing you eastward, whereas that's the ground is meant to be moving that way away from you. You know what I mean? So it's actually
And they have
opposite.
trade winds going the opposite. Yeah, they have trade winds going the other way as well. But the Globe claims that those trade winds are moved, and all of their dynamics to each other in the plane and everything else, all of that's moved in perfect sync, like as if it wasn't moving. Everything has to work out as if the Earth isn't moving. All of those dynamics are moved together. That's how the Globe has to treat it.
I mean, we're talking about so many different velocities here. We've got the velocity of the plane, the velocity of the ground, the velocity of the bulk of the atmosphere, and then local winds, which are parts of the atmosphere flowing at a different speed from the rest of the bulk of the atmosphere.
And that's my point. It all works out as if it's stationary. All those variables have to work out as if it's indistinguishable from being stationary. And that's where I'm like, oh, that's okay. Obviously, it's stationary then. It can't just be that all those variables somehow consciously work out to be nullified.
Like if it were to be the case, you would experience it to actually be noticeable, because let's say you're looking at a azimuth AE map, like so you're looking at the Earth from